Modern ethnic tensions in Kenya are largely artificial constructs created in the last 100 years, primarily during the colonial period and intensified by post-independence politics. But this isn't to suggest that the entirety of tribal wars are to be blamed on the British. In fact, the role of colonialism in today's tribal problems are severely overrated. Yes, colonialism did lay the foundations for these rigid, competitive ethnic blocs. The British were a small ruling minority. To control a vast, diverse land, they exploited existing differences and magnified them through a policy of divide and rule. They created tribes as administrative units, assigning entire communities fixed ethnic identities, homelands, and roles. This formal separation made it easier for the colonial government to weaken resistance because instead of organizing as one people, Kenyans were encouraged to see each other as rivals competing for limited favor or resources from the colonial state. The colonial government went beyond simply recognizing ethnic differences. They assigned specific economic roles and stereotypes to various communities to serve their interests. For example, the Kikuyu were seen as good farmers and were often engaged in agricultural labor or tenancy.
In Kenya, it is significant that of its 5 native tribes, only the Kikuyu has worked as the white man's servant, waiter, busboy, and janitor. And it is the Kikuyu who...
The Luo were preferred as clerks and policemen. The Kamba were recruited heavily into the military. The Maasai were romanticized as warriors and left largely in pastoralist zones. These stereotypes were enforced through policy, employment practices, and education, creating artificial hierarchies that elevated certain groups over others in specific sectors of the economy. Over time, these distinctions bred resentment, competition, and a sense of ethnic entitlement or victimhood that persisted beyond colonial rule. One of the most destructive colonial policies was the seizure of large swaths of fertile land, especially in areas like the White Highlands, for the European settlers. This land alienation displaced many indigenous communities, notably the Kikuyu, Maasai, and others, and concentrated land ownership in the hands of settlers and their local collaborators. The displaced groups were forced into overcrowded reserves or reduced to laborers on settler farms. Meanwhile, neighboring communities who are less directly affected by land alienation were often seen, rightly or wrongly, as having benefited under colonial rule. This created deep ethnic grievances over land, turning what had been shared struggles for survival into bitter competitions over territory, access, and historical justice. Grievances that still influence Kenyan politics today. The British administration formalized ethnic divisions by creating so-called reserves or administrative units based on ethnic identity. They drew artificial boundaries that separated communities that had previously traded, intermarried, and coexisted peacefully. Movement between these ethnic reserves was restricted. For example, Africans often needed passes or permissions to travel or settle outside their designated ethnic area. This hardened ethnic identities and fostered suspicion and isolation. What had once been fluid, overlapping cultural and economic zones became rigid ethnic territories. And this structure laid the groundwork for ethnic politics and territorial disputes in independent Kenya. As the winds of independence began to blow, the colonial government shifted from direct repression to subtler strategies of control, including the manipulation of ethnic fear. The British actively empowered certain ethnic leaders or factions over others to fragment the nationalist movement and delay or weaken the push for independence. They encouraged smaller communities to fear domination by larger groups, feeding the idea that post-independence Kenya will be a battleground for ethnic competition rather than a unified nation. This manipulation helped entrench the belief that politics is about protecting ethnic interests rather than building a just, inclusive society, a belief that Kenya continues to struggle with today. When Kenya gained independence in 1963, the new African political elite didn't dismantle the colonial systems of ethnic manipulation. They inherited it and perfected it. The British had spent 68 years teaching Kenyan leaders that power came through controlling ethnic groups, not serving all citizens equally. Before I tell you all about why the elite continued to perpetuate tribalism in politics, instead of dismantling it, it's imperative to understand the tensions, severe hatred, and mistrust among communities present in Kenya at that time. Between the years of 1963 to 1964, the formation of KANU versus KADU spurred the ethnic realignment. KADU's push for Majimboism was fueled by fear that smaller communities would be swallowed by Kikuyu Luo dominance in the new nation state. This was the first major political realignment along ethnic lines, with KADU positioning itself as the protector of minority interests against perceived KANU dominance. The 1969 Kikuyu Oath is one of the most striking examples of how divisive tribalism was manipulated by the elite after independence to protect the political power. The assassination of Tom Mboya in July of 1969, a widely respected Luo politician, worsened ethnic tensions. Many Luo saw it as part of a plot to sideline their community, and national unity was in crisis.
Nairobi. As the body of Tom Mboya was on its way to All Saints Roman Catholic Cathedral, the pent-up tensions of the waiting crowd neared danger point. The assassinated Kenya minister was a member of the Luo tribe. Bad feeling between his brother tribesmen and Kikuyus, from whom most other members of the Kenya government are drawn, had almost reached its violent climax as the coffin came to the place where it would rest in state after a memorial service. Mourners in their thousands wept unashamedly, sharing the grief of Mrs. Mboya and her children as they entered the cathedral. For President Kenyatta, this too was a time of tension. The anger of many Kenyans had turned towards him as a member of the Kikuyu. Mboya, if he had lived, would probably have been the presidential successor. Kenya at this time was a nation in ferment. As the memorial service began, armed police, supported by troops, faced the inevitable flare-up of tribal hatred. Spurred on by their grief, Luos clashed with Kikuyus, while the forces of law and order fought to keep control. The toll of injured mounted, many of them innocent bystanders who were waiting to file past the coffin after the service. As he left the cathedral, President Kenyatta was ringed by a tight cloak of security. The widow and her children left behind a husband and father whose untimely death had sparked off a surge of tribal violence which seemed set to have wide internal repercussions. When the fighting had died down, thousands of members of the Luo tribe waited to pay their last respects. It was no place for Kikuyus to be. Grief had brought hatred.
After Tom Mboya's killing, there were real fears of ethnic retaliation or political uprising. In this environment of fear, insecurity, and political competition, Kikuyu leaders, especially those close to Kenyatta, organized secret oaths across central Kenya. The secret oathing ceremony was conducted among some Kikuyu elites and leaders, in which participants swore loyalty to Jomo Kenyatta and the Kikuyu community, vowing to support him unconditionally, even at the expense of national unity. The oaths took various forms, including rituals, blood pacts, and pledges. Participants swore to support Kenyatta, defend Kikuyu land and leadership, and oppose the perceived enemies, especially the Luo community and their leaders. We must now ask ourselves that if this is the cost of tribalism, why on earth would or should our leaders continue to perpetuate this horrendous stupidity? The truth is that there are fruits, incentives to use divisive tribalism by the political elites. Firstly, mobilizing people around ethnic identities is the quickest, surest way to build a loyal political base in Kenya. Ethnic blocs offer predictable voting patterns. Instead of working hard to unite people around complex ideas, policies, or national vision, elites find it easier to tap into existing ethnic loyalties and fears. By presenting elections as a battle between our people and their people, they secure votes with minimal effort on real policy work. Tribalism simplifies political competition into a numbers game of ethnic arithmetic. When the tribe win the seat. Secondly, divisive tribalism helps the elite distract citizens from corruption, bad governance, or inequality. When people are angry about poverty, joblessness, or land injustice, elites can shift the conversation. Don't blame me, blame the other tribe. This deflects scrutiny and allows the elite to continue looting with the protection of their ethnic base. Tribalism shields the elite from accountability by making politics about identity, not performance. When elites are caught in scandals or face political loss, they retreat into ethnic identities for protection. They'll say, they are targeting me because of my tribe. This mobilizes their community to defend them, turning personal crimes into imagined attacks on the whole group.
Ameenda kwa Koome Sijui Wameru wamefanya nini. Sasa imeanza kuwa ni mambo ya ukabila. Wameru wanarengwa.
In Nairobi, the county government of Nairobi walienda nyumba za Wakikuyu na Waembu na Wameru zote wakaweka X ya green. Are the traitors of our community in Nyandarua. Na jama ilikuwa wachome vitu ya watu ya Nyandarua.
Case in point, in the run-up to the 2022 general elections, when the DCI was arresting various suspects of corruption, and there was this national pandemonium about they are targeting our people. And so I ask, if the DCI arrests a corruption suspect, is it the work of their community to come and defend them? Or is it the work of the courts to declare such suspects innocent or guilty of the crimes they're charged with? This basically tells you that this is a game to avoid accountability, an insurance policy against prosecution. Thirdly, when people are divided along ethnic lines, they are less likely to unite against the elite's excesses. Tribalism keeps the population fragmented so that broad movements for justice, reform, or redistribution struggles are prevented to take root. As long as people see their neighbors as ethnic competitors rather than fellow citizens, the elite remains safe at the top, a way to divide and rule. Tribalism prevents a united opposition and protects elite dominance. Moreover, in Kenya's political culture, winning power often means controlling state resources, jobs, tenders, land, contracts. By using tribalism to win power, elites gain access to the state, which they can then use to reward loyalties and enrich themselves. The more a community believes that they need one of their own in power, the easier it is for the elites to present themselves as the tribe's savior and gain control for resources. Tribalism delivers control of state resources to the elite and their allies. As a nation, we've paid the ultimate price for tribalism. 2007-2008 post-election crisis killed over 1,000 Kenyans and displaced more than 600,000 citizens. But why? Because politics became a battle of tribes, not ideas. Every election becomes a war of tribes. We have lost thousands of lives, displaced hundreds of thousands, and destroyed property worth billions. Each cycle of violence leaves scars that take generations to heal. When we choose leaders based on tribe, not on merit, we give them a blank check to steal. And when they do, we defend them because they are ours. Billions meant for roads, hospitals, schools, and clean water, lost to corruption, shielded by ethnic loyalty. Goldenberg, Anglo-leasing, dam scandals, billions gone, while citizens fight over which tribe is being targeted by investigations. Furthermore, divisive tribalism has fueled marginalization and uneven development across the country. Leaders reward their ethnic strongholds, punish regions that did not vote for them, and the gap between rich and poor regions keep growing. This breeds more resentment, feeding the next cycle of division. We've seen this among our current leaders. Look at, for example, Koru Soing Dam. Even the budget was already there, everything, even the Chinese contractor had already been given. But immediately the Kenya Kwanza government came over. That thing, in the subsequent budget of 2023, it was removed. It was never there. The construction stalled like that. Many other projects that go to regions that were perceived not to have voted for Kenya Kwanza were similarly cut off from development projects, some of which had already been allocated by plannings of the previous government. You see, and that's the cycle of what we are calling that divisive tribalism is being used to punish those who do not support that particular cause.
As in America and so many countries around the globe, economic growth has not always been broadly shared. Sometimes people at the top do very well, but ordinary people still struggle. Today, a young child in Nyanza province is 4 times more likely to die than a child in Central province, even though they are equal in dignity in the eyes of God. That's a gap that has to be closed. A girl in Rift Valley is far less likely to attend secondary school than a girl in Nairobi. That's a gap that has to be closed.
This is something that was called for even by Mr. Gachagua himself when he was talking about shares, that the government is basically a company or shares, that there are those with a lot of shares, then there are those with little shares, and there are those with none. And those with none should basically expect nothing from the government.
Hii serikali ni kampuni na ni ya shares. Si ndio? Ni ya shares. Kuna wenye kampuni, wale wako na shares mingi, kuna wale wako na chache, kuna wale hawana. Sasa nyinyi mliinvest kwa hii kampuni ya William Ruto na Rigathi Gachagua. Sasa lazima mvune. Yule ambaye alipanda atafanya nini? Simulipanda? Simuliamuka mapema? Na itakuwa namna hiyo. Najua wengine wananikashifu ati mimi nasema ati wale walipanda wavune kwanza. Iko makosa? Mimi naangalia kwa laini, nikiona wewe ulipanda, natoa wewe nyuma, napeleka wewe mbele. Nikiona wewe hukupanda na kutoa na kurudisha nyuma, ufanye nini? Niendelee na hiyo kazi ama niwache?
The guy seems to have a very clear idea of those who don't have those shares, and he has mentioned them, and he has said that those who have the shares have every right to benefit from government contracts, government businesses, doing business with government.
I am unapologetic to demand and to insist that those who believed in William Ruto and supported him to a man have every right to benefit immensely from his government. I have no apology at all. And if that can bring a problem, so be it. Kasongo amechukua maendeleo amepeleka kwa Raila na watu yake hawakupigia kura.
This is just a strategy by the political elite to keep you divided. The reality is that normal citizen, even in Mount Kenya, does not enjoy those benefits. It is the political elite and their proxies that actually are benefiting from this tribal rhetoric. The ordinary citizen, whether in Mount Kenya or whether in Luo Nyanza or whichever part of the country, does not see any benefit of being in government or out of government. We are all suffering as Kenyans until the day you come to acknowledge this reality. This is a tool. This is a tool by the elite. This is not something of our making. Tribalism keeps us from building a strong national identity. Instead of seeing each other as Kenyans first, we see enemies, competitors, and strangers.
So mimi niko Mulima, Rift Valley Mulima. Wananiingilia, huyu ni naibu rais wa Kenya, bona anaenda Rift Valley, anaenda Mulima, anaenda Rift Valley. For the time being, nitaka hapo. What we are doing and what I'll continue to do is uniting the backyard of President William Ruto in the Mount Kenya region and the Rift Valley.
Politics that's based solely on tribe and ethnicity is a politics that's doomed to tear a country apart. It is a failure of imagination.
When identity is weaponized, suspicion replaces trust, and we fail to unite behind a common vision for our country. This adversely jeopardizes efforts towards national integration. Tribalism has cost Kenya dearly, not just in blood, property, and opportunity, but in the very soul of our nation. We must first acknowledge a hard truth. Certain parts of this country have been deliberately marginalized, denied development, and excluded from economic opportunities. This injustice didn't happen by accident. It was fueled by divisive tribalism, as leaders rewarded their strongholds and punished regions that dared vote differently. This has left entire communities feeling abandoned, deepening bitterness and suspicion between Kenyans. And while we condemn this injustice, we must also see how it is kept alive today, not just by the mistakes of the past, but by the lies of the present. In today's Kenya, divisive tribalism has found a new weapon: misinformation and disinformation. On our phones, across social media, falsehoods spread like wildfire, lies designed to make us fear each other, to turn neighbor against neighbor, and to protect the powerful. These lies are crafted by political actors and their proxies, both online and offline. They package stereotypes as facts. They twist history into hate and dress up personal greed as ethnic injustice. It is time for Kenyans to open up their eyes. We must learn to question before we share, to pause before we forward, because every message, every rumor, every manipulated image has the power to fuel division and destroy lives.
But here's the greatest truth. Divisive tribalism is not our destiny. It is not natural. It is a system we inherited, and one we keep alive only through our choices. That means we have the power to end it. Each of us as Kenyans has a role to demand leaders that unite rather than divide, reject tribal arithmetic at the ballot, to stand up for fairness and stop spreading lies that harm. The Kenya we want is possible, but only if we choose unity over fear, truth over lies, and shared destiny over ethnic rivalry. The time to choose is now. Tribalism divides, truth unites. The Kenya we want begins with the choices we make today. Question, verify, act.